We are joined here today with Dr. James Gouinlock, who is Professor Emeritus of Philosophy from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and the author of several books on philosophical naturalism and pragmatism, including John Dewey's Philosophy of Value, Rediscovering the Moral Life on Prometheus books, and Eros and the Good on Prometheus books. Dr. Gouinlock, we're very happy to have you here today.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Nathan. I have great admiration for this whole institution, and so to participate here is a pleasure for me.
Well, it's certainly the pleasure is all ours. We're here today at a conference that's taking place on the future of naturalism, and you're one of the leading, I'll call you one of the old guard of naturalism. You took your PhD from Columbia University. When was that?
Well, I was in the early 60s that I was actually doing the work. I didn't complete the degree until later in the 60s because I had different distractions, but I was there at the tail end of the golden age. I did most of my research with John Herman Randall Jr., who was one of the central figures in the development of naturalism at Columbia, and it linked me to the heritage very closely with my association with Randall. Linked me very closely to the work of John Dewey and George Santayana as well. Although Santayana was not at Columbia, he had a tremendous influence on the Columbia naturalists, and so I was deeply engaged and very happily engaged in that tradition.
I guess you could say that Dewey and Santayana are the leading lions of the American naturalist tradition, at least of the early 20th century in this country. When we talk about philosophical naturalism, if you were asked to give a brief but cogent definition of philosophical naturalism, how would you word that?
Well, the quick answer is that to be a naturalist is to believe that the natural world is the one and only scene of the human enterprise and adventure, and I hold that view. But I think that there, in terms of what I have called the fecundity of naturalism, this is not the point to emphasize. I think the point to emphasize is the methodological norms, if you will, of Dewey's philosophy, and in spite of the fact that there's a vast scholarship on Dewey, the methodological norms of his work are almost totally unknown. They are too easily reduced to a simple conviction that all cognitive questions can be answered only by means of experimental reasoning, scientific reasoning and verification. And that's true, but that's far from coming to the richness of Dewey's naturalism.
Yeah, Dewey seemed very concerned about extending scientific method to all areas of human life. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can unpack this concept of extending scientific method to areas of value, particularly human value, questions of human value. What would be a way that we could describe extending science to areas of human value without a connotation of scientism or a scientistic approach? Clearly, it's a much more subtle conception of extending science. In what ways would you be able to elaborate on that?
Well, any cognitive claim would be, to find a legitimate answer to it, would have to be done by means of experimental method. But moral deliberation or any kind of investigation is not reducible to scientific method. Dewey makes a distinction between primary experience and secondary experience. He also expresses it by speaking of gross experience and refined experience. Gross experience is the experience we sort of unreflectively have, that everybody has when they get up in the morning and start brushing their teeth and going to work and coping with general problems. That is primary experience. Secondary experience is reflective. It's when you start thinking about that and trying to understand it better, and perhaps thinking about how you can conduct it better. But the kind of philosophy that Dewey is talking about and that he himself practiced with excellence refers to dealing with traditional problems of philosophy, not from the standpoint of theoretically derived postulates, or not essentially from the recent writings in journals, but from the primary experience that seems to occasion these questions. And so if we were to take, let us say, a concern with religion, what is it? What is its import? What good is it? And questions of that kind. You would have to be a student of religious life, religious experience, which of course covers centuries and a multitude of different things that fall under the name of religion. And actually on that, George Santayana was much better than Dewey. But Santayana, when he examines religion, as in the book Reason and Religion, as well as other writings,
A part of the Life of Reason,
which is part of the Life of Reason, it's volume 3 of the Life of Reason. He is brilliant has a kind of intuitive imagination in which he reaches insights about what it is that has motivated religion, how religious practices are derivative of a number of beliefs and circumstances, and he's very good at that. But another thing that he's also very good at is seeing how religious life, at least in an incipient way, but often in a profound way, is an attempt, almost invariably a botched attempt, to discern and develop and actualize human ideals.
Right.
Now, the ideals, as far as Santayana is concerned, are all naturalistic.
They're humanistic and naturalistic.
They're humanistic and naturalistic. They have nothing to do with the geography of heaven and the miracles of the saints and all of this. But behind all of that, Santayana believes, are opportunities for the life of reason if we can discern them. And we would be much more capable of achieving them if we rid them of the dogmas of supernaturalism and so forth.
And obviously, yeah, the supernatural content.
Right, that just gets in the way.
And the fanaticisms. Right.
Well, now, if I just conclude to finish this point, what Santayana is doing there in his reflections on religion, he is here a student of the primary subject matter, namely religion. And as I say, it requires imagination, it requires insight, it requires a kind of discrimination so you can discover the ideal values that religion has suggested and somehow defaulted on. Now that is not, strictly speaking, scientific. It's very imaginative, it's insightful, it's discriminating.
Could we substitute scientific with an adjective like critical? Would that maybe broaden the posture?
You could call it critical. You are critical of such experience insofar as you're trying to determine the wheat from the chaff in it all.
I think Dewey himself somewhere, maybe an experience in nature somewhere else, talked about his method as clearing the dead wood.
That's a part of it, but it's
Yes.
not just clearing it. It isn't all dead wood. I'm sorry to keep using Santayana as an example, but because you could find a multitude of them in Dewey. I just picked up on Santayana because he was so good at studying the primary subject matter of religion and the arts and other things as well. But all the wood isn't dead. It's not dead wood. I mean, there is a lot of dead wood, but it's not all dead. But at any rate, Dewey, when he began this discussion and polemic in Experience in Nature about method, he was primarily concerned with modern philosophy, which had reached an utter dead end and had been dead for over a century, and no one knew what to do about it. And Dewey did, and Santayana in part did also. That the modern philosophers had begun with certain assumptions which had no standing in primary experience. They were not verifiable experimentally. Like the idea that Descartes' famous idea that nature is nothing but matter in motion, and mind is a thinking thing and nothing but a thinking thing, and therefore he separated experience and nature totally and absolutely and irrevocably as long as we stick to the Cartesian thinking. Well, Dewey was able to see where and how and why the Cartesian thinking had gone wrong, and yet in the whole Cartesian legacy of modern philosophy, we have philosophers struggling with the problems that had been inherited from Descartes, but maintaining Descartes' assumptions. And Dewey said, let's get rid of all of that and completely rethink the nature of experience and its relationship to nature. There were other a priori assumptions that had underlain modern philosophy, and Dewey, I think, was brilliant in recognizing them and showing their faults. And so he is often said that he overturned the Western tradition. I think that's fair to say that he did.
There's no question, particularly for humanists, Dewey is such a vital figure because he truly reconstructed philosophy. Indeed, one of the titles of one of his most famous books was Reconstruction in Philosophy. Well, we've been talking about Santayana and Dewey, who of course are leading figures, as I mentioned earlier. But I want to talk about your philosophy because you are a noted philosopher in your own right. You have concentrated most of your studies and scholarly work in the field of moral philosophy. And I want to talk a little about some of the points that you intend to bring out in your paper, which you're going to be delivering at the conference. But I want to ask you, in terms of moral philosophy or the moral life, how would you elucidate the practical implications of philosophical naturalism to the moral life?
Well, it would be a specific application of what you and I have been talking about here in just the last few minutes. The primary subject matter of moral philosophy is not the latest declarations found in philosophy journals, or even the earlier works of philosophy, many of which are great and wonderful. But the primary subject matter is the moral life that human beings are engaged in. So that a naturalistic approach to moral philosophy it involves knowledge, involves a great deal of knowledge about the human condition. We have to know, for example, what kind of a being human nature is. We have to be able to make a fairly reliable inventory of the moral capacities of human nature as well as the moral limitations. Many philosophies develop without a hint of that in them, and it makes them just completely vain. Not to say they aren't thereafter read and reread in the academy. A good knowledge of history is helpful, where you can look at comparative kinds of moral systems and what they have achieved in fact on the ground and what they have failed to achieve or how they have turned out disastrously, as they often have. And the same would be true in thinking of political philosophy. You also have to have, I think, to be a good naturalistic moral philosopher, some semblance of the capacities I just praised in Santayana. You have to be a wise and perspicacious student of human nature and human institutions, human practices. Again, these are properties which you'll be lucky to find so much as a sentence pertaining to such things in the most prestigious publications in the field in the last 30-some years.
The things that the qualities that you seem to suggest presuppose a good moral agent, things like cultivation of the mind, the enlargement of the mind, a perspicacious knowledge of nature and the natural traits of the world. These are all things that are a product of education, a good education. And you have been a rather severe critic of academia as it stands today. Where might a person find this kind of cultivation these days, if not in academia?
A good question. I wish I could answer it. I think that the Center for Inquiry is engaged in a project much of that sort, but they are smaller than David was in relation to Goliath, the Goliath being the universities, where academic thought is truly academic. I mean, that is to say, right. Strictly ivory tower, strictly without any purpose to the real turmoils of mankind.
There's been a lot of lamenting these days that the idea of the liberal education being kind of the attempt to impart wisdom in the classical sense has largely been torn asunder in the universities.
Yeah.
I guess that's one of the areas where being a thoughtful person who reads widely and reads books is still a vital component of any good citizen in a democracy.
Well, that would be true in the best of cases. There are lots of people who have read widely and are still political morons, but so it's a very complex problem, and there's no quick answer to what to do about any of it. A culture is a very profound phenomenon, and how it works and what you can do about it is not something that's easily answered. But education in the universities is certainly failing in its what it wants, at any rate, its ambitions. There's a professionalization of the academy. I mean, not just in philosophy, a professionalization and bureaucratization, if you will, where there are sort of unspoken but powerful assumptions about what you're supposed to do to be an academic, how you've got to get ahead. The university departments of philosophy are interested in getting people who are already deep into the scholarship of the contemporary luminaries in the field, and the contemporary luminaries may not be doing much of anything that's of real consequence, but you get ahead by writing articles about them, and if they will reply and defend themselves against you, then you're really in. So that there are sort of union rules, if you will, in the universities, which greatly inhibit any kind of genuinely out of the ordinary kind of thinking. And naturalism in the present context is out of the ordinary, as a matter of fact.
Yes. Your paper that you're delivering at the conference this weekend is called Thefecundity of Naturalism. Mm-hmm. What is the fecundity of naturalism?
Well, it's in the, I've said method, but it isn't just methodical. It is, but Dewey said, and I think he's right about this, that the important differences between philosophy is what they take as primary subject matter. And the primary subject matter are the real problems on the ground, not the problems that philosophers might be earning points on with each other in their publications.
The vicissitudes of life.
Yeah, the vicissitudes of life. But that's not reducible to a science, as I remarked in connection with Santayana. It requires a certain wisdom or judiciousness to be a student of human affairs.
Yes.
Being a student of human affairs is perhaps widely divorced today from being a student of philosophy. And yet you can't write an intelligent political philosophy, you can't write an intelligent moral philosophy unless you have this facility with the human psyche, if you will, and with its insistent demands and needs and corruptions and aspirations and all of these things in order to be an effective philosopher. I believe that very strongly, and I believe that that practice is not widely observed. But that's what. But if you have the fecundity of studying primary experience and trying to contend with that, and if you have this sort of talent for being a student of the primary subject matter, that would be where the fecundity of philosophy comes from. Of course, in Dewey himself, you find an exceedingly fecund philosophy.
Yes. And
Santayana's The Life of Reason is just astonishingly brilliant in terms of its responsiveness to use a cliche, the human condition.
You wrote an excellent article in Free Inquiry magazine, which is the magazine published by the Council for Secular Humanism, housed here at the Center for Inquiry. And the question that you raised in the paper was, what can philosophy, or what does philosophy bring to the question of human happiness? And in that article, you suggested that there are two works specifically that are vitally important.
Do I have to remember my article here?
Well,
Nathan?
I'm just going to talk about the two books, Experience in Nature, and The Life of Reason.
Yes.
And those are two works that you do consider pivotal to kind of a naturalistic, humanistic.
I admire them greatly. Yes.
Yes.
Santayana himself departed from The Life of Reason. Dewey was pretty consistent ever since he turned from absolute idealism back around the turn of the century. I don't know. Each of them has strengths and weaknesses, but I mentioned that in that lecture that I gave here, and I very much enjoyed the whole occasion. That the Greeks had an advantage which maybe none of us will ever duplicate, and that is, it wouldn't be duplicated in human history. They were very, very tiny little civilization there, a very successful one. I mean, producing today what we think of as world historical marvels on every hand. They're poets, they're tragedians, they're architects, they're philosophers, and they're statesmen. It was just astounding event in the history of human culture. And the much maligned sophists of the time, maligned by Plato and subsequently, were people who tried to teach their own brand of excellence, which would mean getting ahead, being excellent in terms of the existing culture of Athens, the Hellenic culture. And that meant that, in fact, the sophists and their sponsors and friends and aristocratic families were very interested in knowing what is excellence, and how do we make the most of our human opportunities. And so this was a topic of widespread conversation in this ancient civilization. So when Socrates picks it up, and he's a very charismatic figure, and he's invited into all the best homes to carry on these conversations. And then Plato comes along and writes these wonderful dialogues about it. These are part and parcel of a culture where, which of course ultimately sacrificed the life of Socrates and scared the daylights out of Aristotle. But it nevertheless, for such serious shortcomings, was an environment where you could, where the topic of human excellence, the topic of human greatness, and they thought human happiness was inseparable from that. You will rarely find an environment that equals it, and so they had an advantage. The university is supposed to take over that role, in contemporary life, and it just hasn't.
Yes. Well, just to wrap things up here, I want to talk very briefly about and mention your book, Eros and the Good, which is the latest book that you have written. Mm-hmm. It's a book that I think you poured a considerable amount of your mind, and if I may say so metaphorically, your spirit into. Mm-hmm. And the book is titled Eros and the Good. What is the conception you see and the connection you see between eros, which is a Greek concept, and the good?
Well, it comes from Plato's Symposium, a marvelous, marvelous dialogue. And eros, as we learn from Socrates, who learned it from Diotima, the wise
Yes.
woman of
The
Mantinea,
speech of Diotima.
is the eros is what drives us from the human to the divine. Now, the divine, I believe, in Plato is used in a metaphorical sense or a figurative sense. But to what is ideal, his examples of the divine, like he speaks of the divine Homer or the other great individuals in the history of Greece who are great lawgivers, or like Hergus, so that it's going to a level of human achievement, human accomplishment, human fulfillment, which is certainly above the ordinary. And yet, as Diotima explains it to Socrates, we all have, it's put in those inclusive terms, that this longing to give birth to what is beautiful or what is ideal, and we have it in us. But usually this longing to give birth to what is beautiful or ideal is lost in the normal temptations of the city, of the cave. And so it takes a great teacher, as Socrates had done that, or attempted to do it for many people, most notably Plato. So there are ideal possibilities of the self, of the individual, and eros is the name given to that yearning for what is ideal in ourselves. It is that idea that is central to Santayana's Life of Reason. He wanted to resurrect that and put it back in more modern terms. And so I do talk about some of the goods of eros, some of the aims of eros in that book, among other things.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a very important book, particularly for those who are interested in leading a fully developed and good life without dependence on necessarily religion or a supernatural conception of the universe. And highly recommend that everyone read Eros and the Good, published by Prometheus Books. Dr. Gouinlock, we want to thank you very much for being here today. It has been a great pleasure to speak with you, and we're thrilled to have you here at our Naturalism Conference.
Well, thank you very kindly, Nathan, and I certainly hope that your work here will prosper. It's a bright light in a rather otherwise dark environment, I think. So,
thank you very much.
It.